This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we continue our look at a new documentary that debuted last month at the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah, Maya Angelou and Still I Rise. It's the first feature-length documentary to focus on the writer and poet. Maya Angelou was a close friend and colleague of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his wife, Coretta Scott King. Dr. King was assassinated on Maya Angelou's birthday, April 4th. Maya Angelou and Coretta Scott King would talk every year on that date. In 2006, Dr. Angelou spoke at Coretta Scott King's funeral in Georgia.
On those late nights when Coretta and I would talk, I would make her laugh. And she said that Martin King used to tell her, "You don't laugh enough." And there's a recent book out about sisters in which she spoke about her blood sister. But at the end of her essay, she said, I do have a chosen sister, Maya Angelou, who makes me laugh even when I don't want to. And it's true, I told her some jokes only for no mixed company. Many times on those late afternoon evenings, she would say to me, "Sister, it shouldn't be an either-or, should it? Peace and justice should belong to all people, everywhere, all the time. Isn't that right?" And I said then, and I say now, Coretta Scott King, you're absolutely right. I do believe that peace and justice should belong to every person, everywhere, all the time. And those of us who gather here, principalities, presidents, senators, those of us who run great companies, who know something about being parents, who know something about being preachers and teachers, those of us, we owe something from this minute on, so that this gathering is not just another footnote on the pages of history. We owe something. I pledge to you, my sister, I will never cease. I mean to say, I want to see a better world. I mean to say, I want to see some peace somewhere. I mean to say, I want to see some honesty, some fair play. I want to see kindness and justice. This is what I want to see, and I want to see it through my eyes and through your eyes, Coretta Scott King. I open my mouth to the Lord, and I won't turn back, no. I will go, I shall go, I'll see what the end is going to be. Thank you.
That was Maya Angelou speaking in 2006 at Coretta Scott King's funeral. Last month at the Sundance Film Festival, I sat down with Rita Coburn-Whack and Bob Hercules, the producers and co-directors of the new documentary Maya Angelou and Still I Rise, as well as Maya Angelou's grandson, Colin Johnson. Talk about when she first met Dr. Martin Luther King and when she first met Malcolm X, who had such a profound effect on her life.
Well, Bayard Rustin had been with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he was leaving. And Maya Angelou had become known because in the early 60s, she had decided, once she heard him speak at Riverside Church, she had decided that she would get together with a group of artists and that they would put on a play to raise money for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So she did that, and it was called Cabaret for Freedom. I believe it played at the Village Gate.
It was something she did with Godfrey Cambridge.
Godfrey Cambridge and a number of actors at that time would get together for Martin Luther King. And one of her lines about that is when she heard that he was talking about nonviolence, and she herself had suffered so much violence and herself been violated, it was like pouring water on a parched desert. she was ready for it. And so she became the coordinator for the Southern Christian Leadership, the Northern Coordinator, which was really fundraising. And she was now an executive with that organization and was raising funds. And he also reminded her of her brother, Bailey, who was very instrumental in her life. And so they formed a friendship.
She also was deeply affected by the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, the first democratically elected leader of the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yeah, we found an amazing clip of a protest at the United Nations in New York shortly after Patrice Lumumba was assassinated, and many people suspected it was CIA meddling that led to this assassination. And Maya and other activists at the time went down to the United Nations and held this protest, and they somehow got into the United Nations. And we have this amazing newsreel clip showing that actual event.
I mean, it's astounding.
Yeah. And it was
you have Adelaide Stevenson.
Adelaide Stevenson was at the desk.
Right.
He was the UN ambassador,
and,
U.S.
yes,
ambassador to the
right.
UN.
And Rosa Guys, who was with the writers, Harlem Writers Workshop, her sister at some point screamed murderers, and when that happened, there ensued a fight and a riot of sorts in the UN. And when she told us that in Winston-Salem, we looked for the UN tapes, and we were able to find that particular
footage is
tape.
Amazing.
And
I mean,
the
it's
place
pandemonium
went up and,
breaks out.
Yeah, yeah.
And then she goes outside, and there's the protests in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there was a protest. The protest we show is not linked directly to that United Nations protest, but Guy Johnson talks about it's a protest about the freedom fighters who had been down in the South and had been abused, murdered in some cases.
The Freedom Riders.
The Freedom Riders,
Yes.
excuse me. And so Guy Johnson tells this amazing story of a protest that he and his mother were part of. And the police came in on horseback. It was very intimidating, as you can imagine. And so the crowds parted, and they slowly were getting people away. But Maya Angelou and her son Guy held ground with about 5 other people.
Well, Guy was a little afraid. He's looking to his mother at this point,
That's
and he's
right.
saying, "Ma, we got to go."
We got to go. And Maya held her ground and was not going to move. And then she finally thought of something spontaneously. She took a hairpin and stuck it into one of the horses, the main horse, and the horses, it was mass pandemonium, and it diffused the situation to a point.
Well, the horse rears
Right.
up, and
That's
you have
right.
the sergeant
And
who
the
is
sergeant
riding
falls,
her.
and then the people come back into the street and they finish the march.
Right.
And I think that one of the things that you see, and Colin and I have talked a lot about this, again, is the fearlessness. And her term there, which comes from Grandmother Henderson, is God and I are a majority. And that's where she got the no fear from, that we have to do what's right. And protests were a part of her life for a very long time. We could not document all the protests, but she protested against apartheid. She protested for black men to have rights. She protested, and she would always say, don't complain, protest, but don't complain. And she held that to her days. She held that you should protest.
Malcolm X. Rita, can you talk about her meeting with Malcolm X and how he changed her life? In fact, ultimately, it's the reason she came back to the United States.
When Maya Angelou in the 60s, I want to say 61 or so, went to Egypt, went to Cairo with Vusmaki, her then husband, and it was a kind of common law husbandry. They were in Cairo. The relationship ended, and she went to Ghana. When she went to Ghana, Ghana was exciting. W.E.B. Du Bois was there. There's a woman in the film, Alice Wyndham, who's a sociologist now, but was her roommate in Ghana. And they got together and they found out that Malcolm X was coming. And Malcolm X wanted to get an African country to bring a charge of genocide against the United States. And all of the people from America who were there, the blacks from America, got together and supported him and talked with him and protested and went into the United Nations and went into the embassies to discuss this. And so it was during that time that they met and talked about the ideologies that he had and became close. And they really became close. And Guy Johnson also had some time with Malcolm X. And so for that amount of time, they spent that together. And she was, as you say, coming back to the United States to work with him.
Where did she hear that he was assassinated?
I believe she had a conversation when she came back to the United States from the airport. And then by the time they were to get together, to actually get together, he had been assassinated. And someone told her to stay in her apartment. Had she seen the news? She said no. And they came over to deliver that information to her because they knew that it would be devastating. And so she never got to work with him when she came back to the United States.
And then 3 years later, Dr. King would be assassinated as well. Dr. King was assassinated on Maya Angelou's birthday on April 4th.
That's right. Dr. King was assassinated on her birthday. She was going to go back to work for Dr. King. She had run into him at some kind of a rally or something, and he came up to her afterwards and said, "I want you to come back to work for me. I've got an important position for you," basically going around the country for Operation Breadbasket, or it was the poor people's movement he was starting up. And so she agreed to do that, but she said, "I just need a little bit of time. I'm going to celebrate my birthday. I'm going to reconnect with some people." And then April 4th happened, and he was assassinated just before she was going to go back to work for him, and it was absolutely devastating. She briefly went mute again. It just devastated her, but it did lead to something very positive.
And it was James Baldwin, right?
James Baldwin came over. James Baldwin was her mentor and best
slamming on her door,
slamming on the door,
say, "Open this door right now," because she wasn't coming out.
She was not going to come out.
She had been home for about 4 or 5 days, and admittedly unkempt and not speaking. And he came and he said, some choice words about opening the door. Mm-hmm. And she let him in, and he said, "Shower, get ready, I'm going to take you out of here." And when he did that, he took her to the home of Jules Pfeiffer was there. I believe Philip Roth was in this group, and they were all talking, and she began to tell stories of her childhood, and it was there that those stories were heard. And Judy Pfeiffer, Jules' then wife, called Bob Loomis at Random House and said, "You ought to hear the stories that this woman has." And I think one of my favorite stories, when she started talking, she said there was such racism in Stamps, Arkansas, that black people couldn't eat vanilla ice cream. And so everybody laughs, and then she begins to tell these stories, and they're stories that she lived. And we've often heard this, so much has happened to her. And I feel like, well, welcome to the world of blacks born in 1928, Jim Crow South, and so on. But she did an amazing job of not only living through that history, documenting that history, participating in that history, and then it being so well documented. So one of the things that you have in this documentary is you have history from a black woman's perspective, which is, beyond Phyllis Wheatley. It's not what's written down. We don't have that. And so this whole trajectory of which her life path was on was something that we had to dig and to follow and to try to embrace.
So she writes, "I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings." It comes out in '69, yes. Soon after Dr. Martin Luther King died. She didn't originally want to write it.
She didn't want to do, she had, as open as she was, these were areas you didn't know. And as Bob Loomis points out, today everybody writes a book, but back at that time, people that were relatively unknown didn't write books about their lives. And so she had to be convinced. And as Bob says, when she found out that it would be difficult, that's when she thought, maybe I can do this.
Let's go to a clip from Maya Angelou, and Still I Rise.
The writer has to take these most known things and put them together in such a way that a reader says, I never thought of it that way before. It's hard. That's a challenge. And I know many writers, and I'm one, who says, Lord, are you sure you wanted me to do this?
That's from Maya Angelou, and Still I Rise. Now, this is one of many autobiographies, but it was her first.
It was her first, and there are 7.
And the response to this, the acclaim she received, was she surprised?
I think over time she was surprised, but also remember that when this book was first done, she talked about sexual abuse. We talk about that now, seriously but more casually. When she talked about it, it was a taboo. People didn't tell that something like this happened. So that book came out in 1969, and it was banned in many schools. And now it's a course adoption in colleges and high schools all over the country, but given the time period, 1969, that was not the case.
She talked about rape. She talked about prostitution.
Exactly.
And what was her philosophy in talking about all of this?
Okay, so she talked about rape and sexual abuse in I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, followed by, that took her to 16 and being pregnant. In Gather Together in My Name, the second one takes you from 17 to 19, in which prostitution occurs, and we felt it was very important to put that into the film because she wanted to make sure that people, as she said, could gather together in her name and not have this idea that they'd never done anything wrong, that she may have expected that she would be ostracized, but she talked to her family about it, talked to Guy about it, and said, I've got to tell this because I lived it.
And I think her point was that others would learn from this, and others could hear her voice and read these books and learn from that and be able to go on with their lives and not be stigmatized by some of the things that happened. So it was a powerful lesson.
Colin Johnson.
Well, if you ask me the philosophy, right, and it kind of goes down, and she has an amazing way to kind of boil situations down, but is, I am human, nothing human can be foreign to me. And so as she received what other people's actions were, she also gave of her own life and understood that people were going to be able to resonate and it would be attainable to people because they come from the same place, which is humankind.
Maya Angelou's grandson, Colin Johnson, along with Bob Hercules and Rita Coburn-Whack, co-directors of the new film Maya Angelou and Still I Rise. I spoke to them last month at the Sundance Film Festival in Park City, Utah. We continue with the conversation in a moment.